The silence of the night was broken only by the muffled sound of dirt being moved. Heavy breathing mixed with the scent of damp earth, and for a moment, all seemed lost. Then, a pair of glowing eyes flickered open in the darkness. Pain flooded the German shepherd's body as he found himself trapped in a tight, suffocating space. His chest rose and fell rapidly, struggling to pull in the little air that remained. The memory struck like lightning. He wasn't there by accident. He had been left, buried alive. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was the cold face of someone he loved, someone he trusted. Callum, his owner, the man holding a shovel, the dirt falling over him, the crushing weight, the fear. And now Huxley had to get out. With desperate effort, he started to dig. His paws were weak, trembling with each movement, but he refused to give up. The earth gave way little by little, but the air was getting thinner. Every second was a battle against time. He knew that if he didn't get out soon, his body wouldn't last. His muscles burned. His ribs ached as if they were broken, but his will to live was stronger. Then, finally, a cold breeze touched his nose. The taste of freedom reignited his strength. With one last push, Huxley tore through the surface of the earth and emerged, his body heaving with exhaustion. The night sky loomed above him, the moon casting only a faint glow over the clearing where he had been left to die. His fur was matted with dirt and dried blood, but he was still alive, and more than ever, he knew where he needed to go. Pain made his body tremble, but he forced himself to stand. Home couldn't be far. He had to go back. He had to understand. With unsteady steps, Huxley began to walk. Every movement was a sacrifice, but he wouldn't stop. His heart pounded in his chest, guiding him down the deserted road. What would happen when he arrived? What would Callum do when he saw him? These questions haunted his mind as he pressed forward. The cold wind cut through his skin, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything around him. But Huxley didn't stop. He pushed on, stumbling, dragging himself when necessary. His journey had just begun, and he had no idea what awaited him when he finally reached his destination. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers. If you love heartwarming dog stories, especially about German Shepherds, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you even more amazing stories. Let's hit this milestone together. Huxley's legs trembled beneath him as he staggered forward. Every step sent a sharp pain through his body, but stopping was not an option. The night was eerily quiet, except for the soft rustling of dry leaves in the cold wind. His paws, raw from digging his way out of the grave, left faint trails of blood on the gravel road. His breath came in short, uneven bursts, his ribs aching with every inhale. Yet, through the haze of pain and exhaustion, only one thought echoed in his mind. Go home. Find Callum. Understand why. The rain began to fall, at first a soft drizzle, then harder, heavier. It soaked through his thick fur, washing away some of the dirt and dried blood, but bringing a deeper chill that burrowed into his bones. His vision blurred. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a dark path winding through the wilderness. He didn't know exactly how far he had to go, but instinct pulled him forward, guiding him through the night like an invisible force. Memories flickered in his mind between the flashes of pain. He remembered running through the yard, his paws kicking up fresh green grass as Callum laughed, tossing a ball for him to chase. He remembered curling up by the fireplace on cold nights, the warmth of the flames reflecting in Callum's tired but kind eyes. He had been loved once. Hadn't he? What had changed? What had he done to deserve this? A sudden sound snapped him out of his thoughts, a distant growl of an engine. His ears perked up. Headlights pierced through the rain as a truck approached from behind. For a moment, hope flared inside him. A human. Maybe they would help him. Maybe they would take him home faster. With the last of his strength, he turned toward the road and limped into the headlights, his body weak but determined. The truck didn't slow down. With a violent rush of air and the deafening roar of the engine, it swerved past him, tires kicking up a spray of muddy water. Huxley barely had time to jump aside before the massive vehicle disappeared into the distance, leaving him alone once again. The realization hit him like a blow. No one would stop for a stray dog, especially one as battered and broken as he was. He was on his own. The rain continued to fall. His legs felt heavier with each passing moment, but the thought of Callum's house, his house, kept his body moving. He didn't understand why Callum had buried him, why the man he had trusted above all others had turned against him. But he would find out. He had to. And so, step by painful step, Huxley pressed on through the storm, unaware of the terrifying truth that awaited him at the end of the road. The house stood just beyond the rain, exactly as Huxley remembered. Warm light glowed from the windows, casting a soft yellow hue against the night. The porch, the familiar wooden steps, the scent of damp earth. It all felt like a distant memory coming back to life. His legs trembled as he climbed onto the porch, each step sending a jolt of pain through his battered body. But he was here. He had made it. With the last of his strength, he lifted a paw and scratched weakly at the door. From inside, footsteps echoed. A shadow passed behind the frosted glass panel. Huxley's tail gave the slightest wag, hope flickering in his tired eyes. The door creaked open, and there stood Callum, his owner. The man who had raised him, played with him, loved him. But something was wrong. Callum didn't move. His face drained of color as his wide eyes locked onto Huxley's filthy, bloodied form. He wasn't happy. He wasn't relieved. He was afraid. Huxley let out a soft whimper, stepping forward, expecting warmth, a touch, anything to tell him that this was still home. But instead, Callum stumbled back, shaking his head in disbelief. His lips parted, his breath unsteady. "No, this isn't possible," he whispered. His hands trembled, his entire body rigid. Before Huxley could react, a second voice came from inside the house. A woman's voice. "Callum? Who is it?" A blonde woman appeared in the hallway, wrapped in a thick robe, her expression shifting from curiosity to sheer terror the moment she laid eyes on Huxley. She screamed. The sharp sound pierced through the rain, making Huxley flinch. Callum turned to her, his voice breaking. It's Huxley," he choked out. "He's alive." The woman's face twisted in horror. "That's not possible. Callum, we buried him. I saw you do it." Huxley's breath hitched. Buried. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. He looked at Callum, searching for something. A sign that this was a mistake, that this was all a misunderstanding. But Callum wouldn't meet his eyes. Instead, his face hardened, his jaw clenched, and his hand shot forward, grabbing the door. Before Huxley could take another step, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the porch, followed by the sharp click of the lock. The warm glow from inside disappeared, leaving him alone in the cold, in the rain, in the dark. He had made it home, but home no longer wanted him. And as he stood there, water dripping from his fur, wounds burning, heart pounding, he finally understood. Callum hadn't buried him by mistake. Callum had buried him because he wanted him gone. The door remained shut. Huxley stood motionless, the rain soaking through his fur, chilling him to the bone. His breathing was ragged, his legs shaking beneath him. He had spent every last ounce of strength crawling back to this house, to his house, believing that once he made it here, everything would be okay. But the door had closed in his face. The warmth, the comfort, the safety, it was gone. Callum didn't want him anymore. For a long moment, he simply stared at the door, trying to understand. His ears flattened. His tail hung limply between his legs. He scratched at the wood again, weaker this time, letting out a quiet whimper. He wasn't angry. He wasn't looking for revenge. He just wanted to go inside. He wanted to lay on his old bed in the corner of the living room, feel Callum's hand rest on his head, hear his voice saying, "Good boy, Hux." But that voice was gone. That love was gone. From inside, muffled voices rose in urgency. Huxley could hear the woman whispering in a panicked tone. "Callum, we can't just leave him out there." Her words were sharp, But Callum's response was even sharper. "He wasn't supposed to come back," he hissed. "I made sure of it." The words sent a cold shock through Huxley's aching body. "I made sure of it." A memory flashed. Dirt being shoveled over him, Callum's face staring down, emotionless. The truth hit him like a final blow. Callum hadn't made a mistake. He had wanted Huxley dead. A sudden wave of exhaustion crashed over him. His legs buckled, and he slumped onto the porch, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He had no energy left. He had fought for hours, clawing his way out of the ground, dragging himself home, only to be turned away. His body had reached its limit. Was this how it ended? Alone in the cold, outside the home that had once been his? A light flickered on upstairs, illuminating the wet grass beyond the porch. Huxley's gaze followed the faint glow, his instincts kicking in. If he stayed here, Callum wouldn't help him. He had to leave. He didn't know where he would go, but his body moved before his mind could catch up. With one last painful effort, he pushed himself onto unsteady legs and stepped down from the porch. His paws hit the muddy ground, and the weight of the world pressed down on him. He took one slow step forward, then another, each one carrying him further from the only life he had ever known. As he reached the edge of the yard, he turned his head one last time. The house stood silently against the night, its warm glow mocking him. No one came outside. No one called his name. The door remained shut. A final breath escaped his lungs, and then, without another glance back, Huxley disappeared into the darkness. The night stretched endlessly before him, a vast, indifferent void. Huxley moved through the darkness, his body running on nothing but instinct. Every step sent fresh waves of pain through his battered frame, but stopping meant surrendering to the cold, to the exhaustion, to death. The house, the only home he had ever known, was behind him now, its warm lights shrinking into the distance. There was no going back. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air damp and heavy. Huxley's paws sank into the muddy earth, his fur clinging to his skin. The road ahead was empty, endless. His ears flicked at distant sounds, an owl hooting, leaves rustling in the wind, but no footsteps followed him. No voice called his name. He was alone. For the first time in his life, there was no one waiting for him, no one searching for him. His legs wobbled beneath him. His body was reaching its limit, his energy drained. He needed shelter, somewhere safe, somewhere warm. But where? He had never been beyond Callum's property, never wandered farther than the neighborhood park. Now the world felt impossibly large, filled with shadows and uncertainty. His instincts told him to keep going, but to where? What was he looking for? A home? Person? A reason to keep fighting? His ears perked at the faint sound of rushing water. A river. The scent of damp earth and algae filled his nose, guiding him forward. The trees parted to reveal a shallow stream, its surface glistening under the pale glow of the moon. He stumbled toward it, his throat burning with thirst. Lowering his head, he lapped at the cold water, each sip reviving him just enough to stand a little longer. But just as his heart began to slow, a noise from the other side of the river made his fur stand on end. A growl, low, deep, not his own. Huxley's head snapped up, his muscles tensing despite the pain. Across the water, just beyond the tree line, eyes watched him. Dark figures moved between the branches, their silhouettes barely visible in the shadows. Then the scent hit him. Dogs. Not friendly ones. A second growl rumbled through the night, followed by the crunch of paws against wet earth. More shapes emerged from the darkness, 3, maybe 4. Large, lean bodies, their fur rough and unkempt. Strays. Huxley had never encountered dogs like these before. Dogs that belonged to no one, that had learned to survive on their own. Dogs that saw him not as one of them but as a threat. The largest of the group stepped forward, lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. His growl vibrated through the air, a warning. Huxley's legs trembled, his mind screaming for him to run. But he couldn't. There was nowhere left to go. And as the strays began to close in, Their eyes locked on him like prey. Huxley realized something terrifying. The world didn't care if he lived or died. What would you do if you were in Huxley's place? Comment below. Should he fight or run? How can he escape this situation? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments. The largest stray took another step forward, his growl deepening. The others followed, their eyes locked onto Huxley with a hunger he had never seen before. These dogs were nothing like him. They had never known the warmth of a home, the touch of a loving hand. They had fought for every scrap of food, every inch of territory. And now he was in their way. Huxley's instincts screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. His legs were weak, his wounds burned, and every breath felt like fire in his lungs. The leader of the pack, a massive, scarred mutt with torn ears and cold, calculating eyes, tilted his head, as if amused by Huxley's pathetic attempt at defense. He let out a short bark, and the others began to fan out, surrounding him. Huxley's heart pounded. His survival instincts flared, but he wasn't built for this. He wasn't a fighter. He was a dog who had once waited by the door for his owner to come home, who had slept on a soft bed by the fireplace. A sharp snarl snapped him out of his thoughts. One of the strays lunged, aiming for his side. Huxley barely dodged. Pain ripped through his body as he stumbled back, his injured leg nearly giving out beneath him. The mutt who attacked him spun around, baring yellowed teeth, ready to strike again. They were testing him, seeing how weak he was, how easy he would be to take down. Huxley's breath came fast and uneven. This was it. He had crawled out of the grave, survived the long road home, only to die here, in the dirt, alone, surrounded by strangers. His mind raced, searching for an escape, but there was none. The river was too deep to cross, the woods too thick to run through. He was trapped. The leader stepped forward now, his eyes cold and merciless. The final blow was coming. Huxley braced himself, his body trembling. He didn't want to die. But as the stray lunged, a deafening roar split through the night. Not a growl, not a bark, something else. A sound so powerful, so dominant, that the pack froze in place. Even Huxley felt his body go rigid. Then, from the darkness, a new figure emerged. Bigger than any of the others. Stronger. A thick-coated dog with piercing golden eyes and a presence that commanded fear. His fur was dark, speckled with old scars, and his body was built for battle. The leader of the pack immediately took a step back, ears twitching. Who was this dog? The newcomer didn't hesitate. He moved swiftly, stepping between Huxley and the strays. His deep, rumbling growl carried authority. The other dogs hesitated. Their postures changed, less aggressive, more uncertain. The leader bared his teeth but didn't advance. For a moment, the night held its breath. Then, in an instant, the pack turned and vanished into the trees, their shadows melting into the darkness. Huxley remained frozen, his breath shallow, his body barely able to stay upright. He turned his head slowly, looking up at the dog who had just saved his life. The golden eyes studied him, unreadable. Then, without a word, the stranger turned and began to walk away. Huxley didn't know who he was, but he knew one thing. He had just been given a second chance. The dark-furred dog moved with quiet authority, his massive frame cutting through the night like a shadow. Huxley stood frozen, his body aching, his mind racing. Who was this? Why had the pack fled at the mere sight of him? The stranger didn't look back, didn't hesitate. He simply walked away, disappearing into the trees as if Huxley wasn't even there. But Huxley couldn't let him go. His body screamed for rest, his paws raw and bleeding, but something inside him knew. This dog was his only chance at survival. He forced his legs to move, stumbling after the stranger. The scent of damp fur and earth filled his nose as he pushed forward, his breaths heavy. Don't fall behind. Don't lose him. The forest grew darker, the trees stretching high above, their branches whispering in the wind. The stranger led him through a narrow path, barely visible in the moonlight. Huxley struggled to keep up, his vision blurring at the edges, but he couldn't stop. Not now. The stray pack would come back. The cold would consume him. He had nowhere else to go. After what felt like an eternity, the stranger finally slowed. A clearing emerged ahead, sheltered beneath the thick canopy of trees. The ground was dry, covered in leaves and scattered bones. The scent of other dogs lingered here, but not like the pack from before. This place felt different. Not a battlefield, but a refuge. A home. The stranger finally turned, his golden eyes locking onto Huxley. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His body covered in scars, his fur thick but rough, his gaze sharp and unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady. "You're lucky to be alive." Huxley swallowed hard, lowering his head slightly. He had so many questions, but the words wouldn't come. His body ached, his mind clouded with exhaustion. The stranger watched him for a long moment before speaking again. "You don't belong out here." His tone wasn't cruel, just matter-of-fact, as if he had seen too many like Huxley before. Dogs that weren't meant for this life. Dogs that wouldn't survive. A lump formed in Huxley's throat. He knew it was true. He had spent his life in a warm home, eating from a clean bowl, sleeping on a soft bed. He had never fought for food, never had to earn his place. And now he was out here, broken and lost, with nowhere to go. The stranger turned away again, heading toward a large, hollowed-out tree at the edge of the clearing. He lay down, his powerful frame stretching across the ground. "Rest if you want," he muttered. "Leave if you don't." Huxley hesitated. His legs wobbled beneath him, his body screaming for sleep. But could he really trust this dog? He had already been betrayed once, left for dead by the person he loved most. What if this was another trap? But as the wind howled through the trees, the memory of the locked door flashed through his mind. Callum wasn't coming for him. He had no choice. Slowly, cautiously, Huxley stepped forward. He curled up on the cold ground, his body aching, his heart pounding. The stranger didn't move, didn't speak again. For the first time since clawing his way out of the grave, Huxley let his eyes close. Sleep pulled him under like a tide, deep and dreamless. And for the first time, he didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Morning came slowly, the weak sunlight filtering through the dense trees. Huxley's body was stiff, his wounds throbbing as he shifted on the cold ground. For a brief moment, he forgot where he was. He expected the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen, the soft sound of Callum's footsteps across the hardwood floor. But when he opened his eyes, reality hit him like a stone. The forest, the pain, the betrayal. The large, scarred dog was already awake, sitting near the edge of the clearing, his golden eyes scanning the woods. He hadn't spoken to Huxley since last night. He hadn't asked questions, hadn't offered comfort, just let him stay. And somehow that had been enough. Huxley forced himself up, his legs shaky but holding. He needed answers. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. The stranger flicked an ear but didn't look at him. "Name's Rowan." Rowan suited him, strong, unyielding. Huxley swallowed, his throat dry. "Why did you help me?" Rowan finally turned his head, his golden gaze unreadable. "Because you were about to die," he said simply. "And I don't like watching good dogs die." Something about the way he said it made Huxley's stomach tighten. How many had he seen die? How many had come through here, lost and broken like Huxley was now? He wanted to ask, but Rowan was already standing, shaking the leaves from his fur. "If you're staying, you work," he said. "If not, leave before you're too weak to walk." Huxley hesitated. He wasn't sure what he had expected. Kindness? Sympathy? Rowan wasn't like that. He didn't waste time on words or emotions. He was a survivor, and if Huxley wanted to live, he would have to become one too. The thought sent a shiver through him. Could he become like Rowan? A dog who didn't rely on humans, who didn't flinch at pain or fear. The image of Callum's face, pale, terrified, flashed in his mind. He had no choice. "I'll stay," Huxley said, his voice stronger this time. Rowan studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Then let's see if you're worth keeping." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the trees. Huxley took a deep breath and followed. Rowan moved through the trees like a shadow, his steps careful, deliberate. Huxley followed as best he could, his body aching, his mind clouded with exhaustion. Every part of him screamed for rest, but he forced himself forward. He couldn't be weak. Not anymore. The forest was alive with sounds. Birds chirping in the branches, leaves rustling in the breeze, distant movements from unseen creatures. Rowan barely reacted to any of it, but Huxley's ears twitched at every noise. He wasn't used to this. He had always lived behind fences, where the loudest sound was the hum of passing cars. This world was different. It was unpredictable, and it didn't care if he was ready for it. Rowan suddenly stopped, lifting his head to sniff the air. Then, without a word, he crouched low, his muscles tensed like a coiled spring. Huxley swallowed hard, doing the same, though his stance was clumsy. Something was nearby, a rabbit. It sat just a few feet ahead, nibbling on a patch of grass, unaware of the danger. Rowan's golden eyes flicked to Huxley. "Food," he murmured. "Catch it." Huxley froze. Catch it? He had never hunted before. His food had always come from a bowl, placed gently on the kitchen floor. He had never needed to chase, never needed to fight for a meal. His stomach twisted, not from hunger, but from doubt. He started, but Rowan's low growl cut him off. "You want to survive? Then act like it." Huxley hesitated only a second longer. Then, heart-pounding, he lunged. The rabbit bolted. Huxley ran after it, pushing his aching legs harder than he thought possible. The wind roared in his ears. The trees blurred past him. The rabbit zigzagged, fast, clever. But Huxley was fast too. His instincts took over, his paws pounding against the dirt. For a moment he felt something familiar, the thrill of the chase. The same feeling he used to have when Callum would throw a ball across the yard. But this wasn't a game. The rabbit veered left. Huxley followed, too slow. It vanished into a burrow beneath a tree. He skidded to a halt, panting, frustration burning in his chest. Rowan appeared behind him, silent as ever. He stared at the empty burrow, then at Huxley. Not angry, not disappointed, just watching. Huxley looked away, ashamed. "I lost it." Rowan sat down, his expression unreadable. "You'll get another chance." Huxley blinked, surprised. No anger, no insults, just a simple fact. He would have to try again. For the first time, he realized something. Rowan hadn't saved him just to let him waste away. He wasn't going to pity him or hold his paw. He was going to teach him, make him stronger, and whether Huxley succeeded or failed was entirely up to him. Huxley took a deep breath. His legs were shaking, his stomach empty, but deep down, something inside him had changed. Tomorrow he would try again, and this time he wouldn't fail. Days passed. The aches in Huxley's body never fully faded, but his legs grew steadier. His senses sharpened. He learned the rhythm of the forest, the scent of rain before it fell, the rustle of prey in the underbrush, the way the wind carried warning before danger arrived. He failed many times. The first time he caught a rabbit, it slipped from his jaws at the last second. The second time he hesitated and it escaped. But Rowan never scolded him, never pitted him. He only watched, waiting for Huxley to decide for himself what kind of dog he would become. And then, one evening, Huxley didn't fail. The rabbit was small, quick, but this time so was he. His body moved before his mind could think, his paws striking the earth with precision. His teeth snapped shut, and when he lifted his head, the rabbit was limp in his jaws. He had done it, alone. No bull, no human hand, just him. Rowan gave a single nod. No words, but his golden eyes said enough. "You're not weak anymore." That night, Huxley sat beneath the stars, the forest stretching endlessly around him. He had survived, not because of Callum, not because someone had fed him or given him a place to sleep, because he had fought for it. A part of him still ached when he thought of his old life. The warm house, the laughter, the soft voice calling his name. But that world had been a lie. Callum had buried him. Huxley had buried him back. Not in the ground, but in his heart. The Callum he had loved no longer existed. And if Callum ever saw him again, he wouldn't recognize the dog staring back. Because Huxley was no longer the same. Rowan stood and stretched. "Come on," he said, walking toward the trees. "We have ground to cover before sunrise." Huxley didn't hesitate. He got up and followed without looking back. And for the first time in his life, he didn't need a home. Because he had become his own. Did you enjoy this emotional story? If so, leave a like to support the channel and subscribe for more incredible stories like this. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were Huxley? Would you have survived? Let's talk. See you in the next video.